So hello and welcome back to the channel. Welcome to another Assetto Corsa Competizione video, back with Assetto Corsa Competizione, and it's good to be back. I ran a couple of sessions the other day, the first race again in the XCL servers, picking up first place and a second place, some really good racing on Wednesday night in the GT4 class, and we're here in the GT4 AMG Mercedes. And the video really I wanted to do was about coming back to the game and the force feedback. Obviously, whilst I've been away, I've spoke to a number of people that have been, I guess, adjusting their setups, adjusting their force feedback settings to try and find something that works for them with 1.9. Obviously, I wasn't here for the initial launch of 1.9, but we're here with the 1.9.1.2 iteration of the game. And as far as I've been made aware, it's a lot more stable than when 1.9 initially arrived. So one of the key things I wanted to touch on when it comes to the force feedback is I hear a lot of people talking about obviously direct drive wheels, trying to get the most out of their wheel, and figures between 5 Newton meters, 8 Newton meters, 11 Newton meters of torque. Huge amounts of numbers, and the Newton meters equates to the amount of weight through the wheel, really, how much resistance is generated by the wheel. Now if you imagine a Newton meter of force, say 5 Newton meters is equal to about 5 kilograms in weight. So 11 kilograms in weight is the amount of weight that we're moving when it comes to the Newton meters of torque. But you really don't want to start getting bogged down with these numbers of how much force your wheel's able to generate. I mean, I'm using the Club Sport wheelbase, which will generate 8 Newton meters of torque. I think I'm probably using about 2%, well, not 2% of that, maybe 20%, 25% of what the wheel's capable of generating. It shouldn't be an absolute battle to get these cars around the circuit. We don't really need that much weight through the wheel. All you're looking for is a good sense of information coming through the wheel. Obviously down in the right hand side of the HUD display you can see the clipping. So as the wheel generates force, it pushes the bar in grey towards the right hand side of the monitor, and once it hits the right hand side it goes red. So through maybe sections like Eau Rouge, or when you're bouncing over curbs, you kind of want to see that hit in the red. But through a lot of the corners on all of the circuits, you don't want to be seeing red at all. And even if you are seeing red, it needs to be a blip here and a blip there. Any more than that and you're just losing detailed information through the wheel. Now I've got my wheel, it goes up, let's say it goes to 100%, it goes to actually 100 and then it goes past that to 200 on the wheel settings itself. I'm using an older firmware because I prefer it over the new firmware, but I'm currently set it at 90% on my wheel, which is less than 100%. It's probably about 40% of the wheel's capability. And if we come, I'll just come back, we're just watching, I'm going to show you this setup that I used on Wednesday night because it was pretty competitive here at Monza. It was only being beaten really by the Alpine. I've not driven the Alpine here, but the Alpine seemed pretty quick. I did record the footage on the night, but I've had some issues with audio settings. Hopefully I've sorted that out and there's not this glitchy sound going on. If I have sorted that out, I'll put that a link into what I've done to try and get that better with the capture card. But we'll just come on board and look at my wheel settings, force feedback settings. And if we go into options, and in the gain section here, in 1.8.9.2 or whatever it was before we moved to 1.9, I had this set to 80%. Still using, I think I was using 95% on my wheel, which again is still less than 50%. So let's say it was 45% on my wheel, 80% gain. So as soon as I came into 1.9, There was just so much weight in the wheel. It was just lost information. It was hard to turn. It just felt like I was fighting with the wheel. So bringing the gain down to 50%, much better. I'm not really battling with the wheel. I'm feeling a good level of detail. The only other thing was the oscillation at high speeds. I just increased the dynamic damping to 150, which seemed to really help. And this frequency that's been added, if you imagine your monitor running at 60 Hertz or 100 Hertz, some of the new monitors may be up to 240 Hertz. That's how many times per second the screen is refreshing. So if you imagine 400 Hertz is the amount of detail that's coming through to your wheel, every single second it's refreshing detail. The level of detail is off the scale, to be honest, now. So you've got to bear in mind just how much information that wheel's taking on board. So try not to set your wheels with too much gain, because you're just going to end up clipping the wheel and it's just lost information. Don't always think that going heavy on the wheel is the best thing. Some of the things that you can do, we'll just return back to the garage here. Some of the things that you can do in the car setup, just to give that feel of a little bit more weight in the wheel, is adding caster. So as soon as you start adding caster, the angle of the steering wheel sort of starts to come down like this to the wheels itself. The wheels sort of move like this. So the more caster that you've got in a straight line, it'll feel the same, but through the corners it'll start to add more camber and it'll start to add more weight to the wheel. So as you can see from the tyre temperatures here, we used to have a range of about 8 degrees difference from the outside of the tyre to the inside of the tyre, and as you can see there, we've got nearly 13 degrees difference. So I really have started messing around with the camber here to try and, if you imagine the tyres sat like this, the front left tyre, so the inside of the tyre is getting so much more hotter because it's got more of a contact patch. So as we reduce the camber, we're sort of setting the wheel more flat on the surface. If you come down to the lowest camber, it's never going to be fully flat, but I found this will reduce the tyre temperature. Obviously it'll give less wear across the tyre, but it doesn't really give you better lap times. It just seems to make the car slide more. So I think I reduced it down to something like that during testing, and I was about half a second or more slower per lap. So whatever these might benefit the car's tyre wear, if it doesn't benefit lap time, it's not going to benefit you unless you're doing a very long race, and over the stint, say it's going to take you to come in to the tyre to change the tyres 30 seconds. If you could get away with not changing your tyres throughout that entire race because you're losing half a second a lap, you're still going to have to do maybe 60 laps to get the benefit of not changing your tyres, and then obviously you're going to be less competitive. So there's sort of wins and losses on using the camber to your advantage. I think for short races of an hour long, you're better off getting the performance from the car really than trying to prolong tyre life. And I'm still using around 27.4, 27.5 psi through my tyres, because you can see the underinflation through the tyre itself. Although the car doesn't slide around as much in the 26 psi range, but I still think it has better performance, especially on these high-speed circuits like Monza, Paul Ricard. You're going to get better performance having a tyre that's more it's inflated to a better degree. But the main emphasis in this video was more about trying to not overdo it when it comes to the amount of force feedback you're putting through your wheel. You can see the lap time that I set just there, a 1:57.6. I think during the evening I set a 1:57 dead. I think I had on my Delta at the time a 1:56.5. 1.6 in this setup. I think it was a little bit cooler as well that night. But just to look over this setup, so you're going away with a setup that I've used during the race. I really enjoyed it, really enjoyed driving the Mercedes. So much fun to just be back in this game and playing. I've not really messed with the damper settings, so it's not a massive setup change. Brake balance, obviously something that I touched on in a previous video, trying to lower that brake balance and try and get us used to as much rearward bias as you can. It really will help when it comes to the braking performance of the car. Some things I did notice is just how much maybe I'm braking 20 yards earlier than previously. So maybe at the 150 yard board I was always looking to start my braking. It's kind of a little bit before that now. So I think in 1.9 the braking distances may have changed a little bit. But yeah, I really enjoyed Wednesday night's races. A bit of a pity really that I wasn't able to capture the footage from that race. Although I did capture it, I did create a video. As soon as I got half an hour into the video, the audio issues started. So I just thought no one's going to want to watch that video. So I just scrapped it all together really. But yeah, hopefully you enjoyed this video. Hopefully it touches on a few subjects that you might be struggling with when it comes to force feedback. And some of the other issues that come with force feedback. A lot of people are always asking me what settings I'm using on the wheel. And it really is irrelevant what settings I'm using on my wheel unless you're using exactly the same firmware as I'm using, which is a slightly out of date firmware. I would generally always suggest that you run the most up-to-date firmware because it's what the game developers will use when they're testing. But I think, as we all know, I don't think the team developing Assetto Corsa on console do a great deal of testing when it comes to wheels, because generally a lot of the times they've not really been very helpful, the settings that have been suggested. And I think obviously when the game always gets launched there's always so many issues with it, so quite how much testing goes on behind the scenes I really don't know. But yeah, coming back to the wheel settings, it really does depend on what firmware you're using, what settings are on my wheel as to what settings I've got in game. So yeah, when you're asking people can you help with settings, you're really only asking the same people that are using the same firmware and the same wheel as you. So if you're ever asking those questions in a forum, it would be worthwhile saying, for example, I'm using the Club Sport 2.5 wheelbase and I'm using firmware blah blah blah, because if someone else answers your question and they're using a different firmware, they might say, oh yeah, I'm using the 2.5 wheelbase and I'm using it with 170% gain on my wheel, and you're using an older firmware like mine where 170% gain is a huge amount of weight through the wheel, but for them it might be very different. So always consider asking those questions as well when you're looking at what firmware settings or what force feedback settings are other drivers using. I think I've covered everything I wanted to cover really in this video. Hopefully I'll be putting out more content in relation to Assetto Corsa Competizione. Really, I'm loving coming back to this game. I'm glad to see that on Wednesday night's racing I've not lost any racing ability to pick up that first place podium. I think Adam Shaw was the other guy who was racing in the second race and first race, but two brilliant races, but unfortunately I've just got sort of stuck with another couple of drivers at turn one here, and obviously you just, as soon as you touch another car you kind of get stuck together a little bit. It was very hard to separate through turn one, and that usual Monza debacle through turn one. But yeah, thanks for watching. If you haven't yet hit that subscribe button, please do. Please leave a comment in the comment section. You know I always try and get back to everyone. and smash the thumbs up button. It really does help generate more interest in the channel. But until then, thanks for watching. As always, ciao for now.